In a golden civilization, I introduce a whole new way to map the universe. One of the things that I realized as I did this work was that if we were to actually create a golden civilization that was sustainable and that would really work, that we needed to do as much work inside ourselves as outside. And so as I was wrestling with, well, how do we put these two things together? One of the themes that was active for me in both realms was the theme of freedom. When we do inner work, that's really what we're aiming at. We're aiming at a kind of profound freedom for ourselves. But externally as well, isn't the aim of economics to deliver more and more freedom to people? And certainly the aim of democracy is to bring freedoms to people. So it was curious that what happened for me was a question, which I'm going to pose to you, that led to this new way of mapping our experience and mapping really, I think, the universe. So the question is, have you ever had a moment of freedom in the past? I mean, we it's kind of a rhetorical question because, right, we all have, whether it's walking along the beach or doing some creative venture or making love or doing something that you're just inspired by. So I'm going to ask it anyway and ask you to raise your hands. How many of you have had, please raise your hands. How many of you have had a moment of freedom in the past? So pretty much everybody raises their hands, right? It's an obvious question, but it's a trick question, and I gotcha, all right? Because the truth is that none of us have ever experienced freedom in the past. The only time we have ever experienced freedom is right now, in the present moment. That's pretty powerful when you think about it. It's the only moment that we know is real because it's the only moment we've ever experienced in any way. So here's the traditional map of the universe. Now, I haven't put on the fourth dimension of time here, but you can see that, you can imagine it, layers of the universe cut into, and you see the grid of space and time, which is how science has carved up our universe. It's very, very convenient. It's convenient for commerce because you can chop up these things, you can analyze them. It's convenient for universities. It's convenient because you can chop up things and break them down into individual parts and sell them. Okay? So it's very convenient for the kind of world that we have created, the kind of civilization that we have created, right? But we've just articulated for ourselves a whole different understanding of time and space. One in which the present moment is everything. So here we are in the traditional view. What's the present moment? You can hardly see it in the map of the universe. It's so tiny, it's so ephemeral. It's here and then it's gone. When you have an experience of freedom, many of us have them throughout our days. Some of us have them less often, but when you have a moment of freedom, when you experience it, does it feel tiny? I don't think so. It doesn't for me. It feels spacious, it feels large, has great energy in it. It's all in all, it's everything in a way. So what an extraordinary thing that the way we've mapped our world has these moments of freedom that mean nothing. So I thought, well, let's try a different way of mapping this. What if we made the present moment the center of things? After all, I mean, the present moment really is larger than all of this because it can experience it all, it can look at it all, it can analyze it all. So what I thought of doing was let's just pull the present moment out of time and space. What happens? What happens then? It's interesting. There's a wonderful study. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with it, by Killingsworth and Gilbert. done, I think, just locally at Harvard. Daniel Gilbert, for years, has taught the most popular course there. It's a course on happiness. And the way that he understands and analyzed happiness in this particular study, I think of it as freedom. So I'd like you to just reframe that for a moment. So in this study, it's really quite astonishing what they did. But they gave an iPhone app to people, I think in over 80 countries, all over the world. Thousands of people had this iPhone app. And what they did was they would ping them periodically through the day. They'd ping them. And at the moment that they were alerted by the iPhone app to this moment, they were asked two questions, and maybe a third. The two really significant questions were, are you happy or not? Okay, so that's one question. And the second question was, are you focused? Are you present? Are you focused on what you're doing or not? And then the third question was, kind of basically, what are you doing? So we think of happiness as being connected to what we're doing. We think if we're on the beach in Maui with our pina colada or whatever, we're there with our dear friends and the surf and the sand and the wind and the sun, we think, that's happiness. Whereas we think maybe taking out the garbage is not. Right? Well, it turns out our notions of happiness are all wrong. That there's virtually no correlation between happiness and what people were doing all over the planet. That the correlation was entirely with, were they present in this moment? Were they focused? Were they here entirely? So it's very interesting from the standpoint of what we've just been talking about. We just were looking at freedom and looking at, do we ever experience it in the past or the future? No, it's right here in the present moment. That's where we experience it. Well, Gilbert and Killingsworth were looking at individual moments, and then which of them had freedom in them. And what they discovered was paying attention to the present moment delivers it. So my question here is, what happens? What happens if we pay attention? If this is really the key to life, to time and space, what happens if we pay attention? One of the ways that I think of the present moment, it's so amazing. We live our life as if there were no present moments. We go on and we've got our themes for the day. We've got our to-do lists. We've got our, all the stuff that's happening, our future and our past. And we live in our stories. So to me, the present moment, as I've come to look at it and understand it, it's the hidden gem. It's hidden from us. It's not obvious. Because we're in aging bodies, we have lots of stories that we're listening to and telling, we forget all about it. But here it is, we just recognized it for ourselves, and Killingsworth and Gilbert tell us, it's the only place freedom happens. So what if we created a map, really created a map that had the present moment as the center of the universe? What would happen? And in particular, as we create that map, what happens as we approach, as we meet, as we attempt to pursue, to experience, to be present with the present moment? What happens? So I call this the Map of Mindfulness. And in my new book, A Golden Civilization, I have many of these, a variety of them depending on what topic we are addressing at the time. So here we have the image of time and space up at the top, and I've got this thing called self up there too, and we've been talking about how we think a lot about ourselves. But let's talk for just a moment about mindfulness, meditation, the practice of it, how it works, because I think you'll see why I have self up there. So in a mindfulness approach to life or to meditation, we find ourselves, we sit usually in a sitting posture, and we attempt to meet each moment. Each moment. And we attempt to meet it as a moment of sensation. Now, I want to say I'm describing a particular kind of meditative practice called mindfulness. It's the one that's studied the most often scientifically. So there are other varieties, but this is the one that's really the most popular one, and the one that is addressed most often in the scientific literature. You know, not only do we have scientific literature here, we also have a contemplative literature that goes back for thousands of years, looking at what in fact happens when we make this attempt. So there we are listening. It's an act of listening. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, because listening is what brings out the best of us, isn't it? You know, when we really listen to our partners, to our children, to people we work with, it's the best of us. So in mindfulness, one of the things we're doing is we're strengthening that practice of listening. So as we're sitting there starting our meditation, let's say we're meditating in the morning, what happens is we go, you know, we get pinged by a text mail. We remember that we were supposed to have a meeting in 2 hours and we hadn't arranged for the location. And then we recall that we sent our kids off to school and we forgot to give them their lunch. They forgot to take their lunch. You know, all these things come up and we go, you know, not today. It's not a good day for meditation, right? So that's kind of classic. And I want to say that it's classic even for someone who's meditated for 50 years, most often several hours a day. I still have those times where I sit down and I'm filled with these thoughts. And you go, well, why? You know, what's the value of your meditation? Well, this is what's happening. In our life, the way we navigate the world is we navigate the world with lots of stories about ourselves. We navigate the world naturally in terms of time and space, and in terms of our entering into the next task that we were going to accomplish, or the prior task. So that is a habit that we fill our lives with. It's not a bad habit, it's functional. It's a useful habit. But what happens when we sit down and do a mindfulness meditation is that we're attempting to shift that habit. That's all that's going on. And we're shifting that habit so that when we meet a sensation of the breath at the nostrils, say, or the belly, and we feel its temperature, or we feel its shape, or we feel it moving about a bit, there's no I, me, or mine in there. There's no story. There's nothing about me. It's just the moment as it is. So what happens in a meditation is that we shift a cognitive habit from one that's revolving around the self to one that's impeccably present without the self. Do you see that? It's pretty amazing. So what happens when we cultivate selflessness? What happens at the bottom of the sphere here is I've set up a whole other world of quiet, I call it great virtue and great spirit because we have access to deeper realms in that space of quiet. A few more things about this. I think of of meditation as delivering, and there are many freedoms that it delivers, but there's two in particular that I think are quite astonishing. And they both have to do with this approach to the present moment. One of them is that as we keep coming back to the present moment, it keeps throwing us back to time and space. It doesn't let us get there. You know, it makes you realize that there is nothing in the world more powerful than the present moment, which is why it should be the center of our map of the universe. There's nothing in the world more powerful. We can't land there and just stay there. It keeps throwing us back. And there's two ways that it throws us back. One is the normal way. It throws us back in a reactive way and unconscious. And we're just kind of going through life with all our habits, the way we understand them, the way we identify with them. And then in that world, I call that the mirror of forgetfulness. So we keep forgetting about the present moment and keep getting sent back to the world of time and space. But there's another world as we keep approaching this moment and we get more and more fine-tuned with our ability to meet it. And that is that we experience the world, instead of the present moment being a mirror of forgetfulness, it becomes a mirror of awakening. So that when we enter into the world, we're far more awake and alert. So I was speaking a moment ago of two remarkable freedoms that mindfulness delivers to us. One of them has to do with this impossibility of kind of capturing the present moment. It has to do with how the present moment keeps sending us back again and again, rejecting us in some way as we attempt to meet it. We meet it for a moment and it's gone. We've got to come back and do it again. We've got to keep coming back and doing it again. So what that does is it delivers to us tremendous energy, great alertness, the ability to be more and more aware of present moments as we go through our life. So there's a clarity to that, a quickness to it, extraordinary. And at the same time, and quite paradoxically, this development of selflessness, as we let go of our self-stories, as we keep coming back to individual moments of sensation, delivers us this place of great quiet, of great virtue, and of great spirit. So one more thing here I'd like to share, and that is just simply in terms of a golden civilization. What I realized as I put this map together is that we have a map now where we can still do all the things that we do, the old map being one of acquisition and one of conquest, because it has all these elements that are broken up and that we can take on. But we also have a map that has our own awareness in it, that is a field of awakening, really. And in this map, one of the things that we are able to do, the more mindfulness we do, is that we are able to access, develop, and bring into the world, into time and space, virtues, great virtues. There's a wonderful book out in the last year, I think it's called The Science of Meditation, by Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson. Another great resource for all of this. And in England, they call it altered traits, and that's where I got it. So I thought, well, that's what it's really all about. I think it is what it's really all about. What it talks about is what are the traits? What are the traits that develop as a consequence of a practice of mindfulness? And as you look at them, you go through them in patience and equanimity and compassion and clarity and kindness and generosity. You can find courage. What is happening with the development of those traits is Danny and Richie talk about how they change the brain so that it's actually changing the configuration of the brain so that we are delivering those virtues into civilization. Pretty powerful. I'd like to close reading something up here that I've written about this, reflecting on all of this. The nature of the universe is dependent on each of us individually, on our individual relationships to the present moment. Rather than a map of acquisition or conquest, as a map of mindfulness, the universe is populated with moments of freedom and with virtue and selfless acts if we are awake. What the nature of the universe is depends on our awakening. In a golden civilization, the theme of our talks tonight, in a golden civilization, every moment is filled with freedom. It's awake. Thank you.